The clay pot shattered across the marketplace. Palm oil splashed across the dirt road while laughter exploded from every corner of the village. There she goes again. Cursed girl. She can't even carry a pot properly. Amara froze in the middle of the crowded market while dozens of eyes stared at her. A little boy pointed at her torn wrapper and laughed loudly. Look at her clothes. Women nearby covered their mouths while whispering cruelly. She looks worse every week. No wonder no man wants her. Her family's curse is following her. Amara lowered her eyes quietly. The broken pot beside her was the last one she owned. And now it lay in pieces beneath the feet of people who enjoyed watching her suffer. An old fruit seller shook her head dramatically. You should stop coming to the market. Your bad luck contaminates business. The crowd laughed again. Then suddenly someone kicked the broken clay pieces toward her feet. Amara flinched softly. But she said nothing. Because she had learned long ago that defending herself only made people crueler. At the edge of the crowd, Chief Bako's son stepped forward slowly. Tall. Expensive robes. Gold bracelets shining beneath the afternoon sun. Kofi smiled arrogantly while looking her up and down. You know, he said loudly, if you beg properly, maybe someone here would pity you. More laughter followed. Amara clenched her hands tightly. I'm not begging. Oh? Kofi smirked. Then why are you still here? The villagers watched eagerly. Humiliation had become entertainment in the village. Especially when Amara was involved. My grandmother needs medicine, she answered quietly. Kofi laughed. That blind old woman is still alive? Several villagers laughed harder. One woman added cruelly. Maybe the spirits forgot to take both of them. Amara's eyes watered slightly. But before she could answer, a loud thunder crack exploded across the sky. Dark clouds rolled above the village instantly. Wind swept through the marketplace. Then people suddenly turned toward the village entrance. A man staggered through the gate. Dust covered. Injured. Wearing worn traveler's clothing. One side of his face carried dried blood near his temple. And despite his exhaustion, something about him felt powerful. His shoulders. His eyes. The way he carried himself. But the villagers only saw poverty. The stranger stopped near the market center breathing heavily. Please, he said weakly. I need water. Nobody moved. The fruit seller scoffed. Another poor wanderer. Go somewhere else, another man snapped. We don't feed strangers here. The injured man nearly lost balance. Still nobody helped. Then quietly, Amara stepped forward. The crowd immediately burst into disbelief. Of course the cursed girl helps him. She found another useless person. Amara ignored them. She removed the small water gourd tied beside her waist. It was the last clean water she had. Still, she handed it to the stranger. Drink slowly, she whispered. The man looked at her carefully before accepting it. His eyes lingered on her face. Not with pity. Not with disgust. But with surprise. Real surprise. Because after traveling across villages for weeks, she was the first person who had helped him without asking for anything. Kofi laughed loudly. Perfect. The village beggar found herself a husband. The crowd roared with laughter again. Amara's face burned with embarrassment. But the stranger suddenly looked directly at Kofi. And something cold flashed behind his eyes. The laughter slowly faded. Even Kofi shifted uncomfortably for a second. Then the stranger spoke softly. Kindness embarrasses cruel people. Silence. The villagers stared. Kofi stepped forward angrily. What did you say? Amara quickly touched the stranger's arm nervously. Please, she whispered. Don't. But the man continued staring calmly at Kofi. I said cruelty often hides cowardice. The crowd gasped quietly. Nobody spoke to Chief Bako's son like that. Nobody. Kofi's face darkened instantly. You should be careful, traveler. The stranger didn't answer. Instead he turned toward Amara again. Thank you for the water. His voice sounded calmer now. Gentler. Amara nodded awkwardly. You should rest before the storm gets worse. Rain suddenly began falling heavily across the village. People rushed to gather their goods. The marketplace quickly scattered into chaos. The stranger winced slightly while holding his injured side. Without thinking, Amara spoke again. You can stay at my hut until the rain stops. Several villagers burst into laughter again. The cursed girl is bringing men home now. Kofi smirked cruelly. Careful, traveler. Her bad luck might kill you before the storm does. But the stranger simply looked at Amara. And for the first time in years, someone looked at her like she mattered. Before this story continues, comment below and tell us honestly, would you help a complete stranger even if everyone around you mocked you for it? And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful African folklore stories every week. Rain hammered against the village paths while Amara led the stranger through muddy roads toward the forest edge. Her tiny hut appeared between tall trees moments later. Small. Old. Barely standing. The roof sagged slightly from years of storms. The stranger looked at it quietly. You live here? Amara nodded. It's not much. Inside, a weak fire burned near the corner. An elderly blind woman sat weaving baskets slowly beside the flames. Amara, the old woman called softly. Who's with you? A traveler. The old woman smiled gently. Then bring him closer to the fire before the rain freezes his bones. The stranger stared at her in surprise. No fear. No suspicion. Only warmth. Amara helped him sit carefully. You're injured. It's nothing. That's what stubborn people always say. He almost smiled. Amara knelt beside him examining the wound near his ribs. You need herbs. You know medicine? My mother taught me before she died. Something painful crossed the stranger's face. I'm sorry. Amara shrugged faintly. Most people here think my family was cursed after they died. And you? She looked into the fire quietly. I think people fear sadness they don't understand. The stranger stared at her silently. That answer stayed inside him longer than expected. Hours later, after eating the small meal Amara prepared, the stranger finally spoke again. My name is Obese. Amara nodded softly. I'm Amara. The old grandmother smiled from beside the fire. That name means grace. Obese looked at Amara carefully. It suits her. Amara quickly looked away embarrassed. Nobody had complimented her in years. That night, rain continued pounding the roof while the grandmother slept. Obese remained awake watching Amara repair old clothing beside the firelight. You should sleep, she said softly. So should you. She smiled faintly. The clothes won't repair themselves. Obese hesitated before speaking. Why do they treat you like that? Amara stopped sewing for a moment. Then quietly answered. Because it's easier for unhappy people to create someone to blame. You don't sound angry. I used to be. And now? She looked toward her sleeping grandmother. Now I'm just tired. Something tightened painfully inside Obese's chest hearing those words. Because he had traveled across the kingdom for months pretending to be poor. And everywhere he went, people revealed who they truly were. Some worshipped wealth. Some abused weakness. Some treated kindness like foolishness. But Amara, even after endless humiliation, she still chose compassion. And that made her different from everyone else. The next morning the village buzzed with gossip immediately. The cursed girl brought a strange man home. They say he slept there all night. Shameless. Kofi heard everything while drinking palm wine outside his father's compound. His expression darkened instantly. Who is this traveler? A nobody, one villager answered. Poor. Injured. Looks useless. Kofi smirked. Perfect for her. But something still bothered him. The traveler's eyes. The confidence. Poor men did not speak like that. Meanwhile, Obese helped Amara fetch water from the river. Villagers openly stared while whispering. One woman laughed loudly. Look at them pretending to be husband and wife. Another added. Two beggars together. Amara lowered her eyes again. But Obesai suddenly spoke calmly. People who gossip loudly usually hate their own lives quietly. The women immediately stopped laughing. Amara looked at him nervously. You shouldn't anger them. Why? Because powerful people here enjoy revenge. Obesai carried the heavy water pot effortlessly. Then maybe powerful people here need reminding that fear does not make them important. Amara stared at him carefully. You don't sound like a poor traveler. Obesai almost smiled. And what do I sound like? Someone used to being obeyed. For one brief second, silence passed between them. Dangerous silence. Then Obesai changed the subject. Your grandmother loves you very much. Amara smiled softly. She raised me after my parents died. How did they die? Fever. Pain flickered through her eyes. The village avoided us afterward. People became afraid. And nobody helped? A few tried. She paused. Most disappeared when gossip started. Obesai clenched his jaw slightly. He had seen this too many times while traveling. Fear destroying humanity. By evening, the entire village gathered for storytelling near the central fire pit. Drums echoed beneath the night sky while elders shared ancient tales. Amara usually avoided these gatherings. But her grandmother insisted. You cannot hide forever, child. Reluctantly, Amara attended beside Obesai. The whispers began immediately. She brought him again. Look at his clothes. They match perfectly. Kofi sat near the front beside wealthy villagers. The moment he saw Amara walking beside Obesai, jealousy burned across his face unexpectedly. Not because he loved her, but because she ignored him. And men like Kofi hated rejection more than anything. During the celebration, dancers entered the circle one by one. Music filled the village. Children laughed. Then suddenly an elder called out. Amara! Come dance! The crowd immediately laughed mockingly. She'll probably trip over herself. But the old grandmother smiled proudly. Go! Amara hesitated. I don't want more embarrassment. Obesai leaned closer quietly. Then dance for yourself. Not for them. His voice carried strange confidence. And somehow, it gave her courage. Slowly, Amara stepped into the firelight. The drums began softly. Then something changed. Her movements became graceful. Powerful. Elegant. The crowd slowly fell silent. Even Kofi stared in shock. Because beneath the worn clothes and quiet suffering, Amara was beautiful. Not ordinary beauty. The kind that came from gentleness surviving pain. Obesai watched her without blinking. And deep inside, something shifted permanently. When the dance ended, silence covered the village for 2 full seconds. Then applause exploded everywhere. Except near Kofi. His expression looked dangerous now. After the gathering ended, Kofi cornered Amara near the path home. You embarrassed me tonight. Amara frowned slightly. I wasn't trying to. You made everyone stare at you. That's not my fault. Kofi stepped closer. You belong beneath people like me. Obesai suddenly appeared beside her. And yet she still stands taller than you. Kofi's face darkened instantly. You should remember your place, traveler. Obesai stared calmly. And you should earn respect instead of demanding it. Several nearby villagers gasped quietly. Kofi pointed angrily. You think because she feeds you, you can speak to me however you want? Obesai stepped forward slowly. I think weak men use power to hide insecurity. The tension became unbearable. Amara quickly grabbed Obesai's arm. Please. Let's go. Kofi smiled coldly. This village destroys people slowly. Then he walked away. That night, Amara sat outside her hut staring at the moonlight. Obesai joined her quietly. You shouldn't keep defending me. Why? Because Kofi is dangerous. So? He'll punish you. Obesai looked toward the village lights calmly. I'm not afraid of men like him. Amara studied his face carefully. Who are you really? For a moment, the king inside him almost answered. But instead he smiled faintly. Just a traveler. Weeks passed. And slowly, the village began noticing changes. Amara smiled more. Laughed more. Even her grandmother noticed. You love him, the old woman whispered one evening. Amara nearly dropped the basket she was weaving. Grandmother. I may be blind, child, but I'm not foolish. Amara sat quietly beside her. He's different. How? He sees me. The old woman smiled gently. That is rare. Meanwhile, Obesai secretly observed the village daily. The corruption. The cruelty. The fear. Chief Bako stole food taxes while children starved. Wealthy families hoarded grain during drought warnings. Villagers obeyed because they feared punishment. Obesai's anger grew quietly each day. This kingdom belonged to him. And his people were suffering beneath corrupt leadership. One afternoon, Obesai overheard Kofi speaking privately to several men. That girl is becoming too proud. She rejected you publicly. Kofi's eyes narrowed. She needs reminding who she is. A dangerous silence followed. Obesai's jaw tightened instantly. That evening he warned Amara. You should stay away from Kofi. He's hated me for years. He wants more than humiliation now. Fear flickered across her face briefly. But she forced a smile. I've survived worse. Obesai stepped closer. You shouldn't have to survive cruelty every day. Their eyes locked again. The air changed. Emotional. Heavy. Then softly, Amara whispered. Why do you care about me so much? Obesai's heart pounded harder than expected. Because the truthful answer terrified him. Before he could speak, a scream suddenly echoed across the village. Smoke rose near the storage huts. Villagers ran toward the fire in panic. Flames spread rapidly beneath the night sky. People shouted everywhere. Water! Save the grain! Move! Amara immediately rushed forward, helping carry buckets despite the danger. Obesai watched her risk herself for others who mocked her daily. And somehow, that made him love her even more. Hours later, after the fire finally died, villagers gathered angrily near the damaged storage house. Then Kofi suddenly pointed directly at Amara. She caused this. The crowd froze. Amara stared in disbelief. What? My father warned everyone her curse would destroy this village. That's not true. But fear spread quickly through the crowd. People whispered nervously. She danced before the fire. But crops are already failing. Now this? Kofi raised his voice dramatically. She brings misfortune everywhere she goes. Amara's breathing became shaky. No. Several villagers stepped backward away from her. Even people she once helped. Obesai stepped forward immediately. This fire started because your guards ignored the smoke. Kofi pointed angrily. You defend her because you share her curse. The villagers murmured louder. Fear always spread faster than truth. And Kofi understood that perfectly. Chief Bako finally arrived surrounded by elders. His voice thundered across the crowd. Enough! Silence fell instantly. The chief stared coldly at Amara. Perhaps the spirits truly reject your presence here. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Chief, please. You will remain inside your hut until the elders decide your punishment. Gasps spread through the crowd. Punishment. The word terrified everyone. Before the story continues, take 1 second to like the video if you're enjoying this emotional story so far. And comment below, do you think the village truly believed Amara was cursed, or were they simply looking for someone weak to blame? The next 3 days became unbearable. Nobody visited Amara's hut anymore. Children threw stones at the walls while running away laughing. Women spat near her doorway. Even merchants refused selling her food. Inside the hut, her grandmother held her trembling hands gently. Do not let hateful people define your spirit. But what if they banish us? The old woman smiled sadly. Then we survive elsewhere. Obesai sat quietly near the doorway listening. Anger burned inside him harder every hour. Not because Amara suffered, but because these people enjoyed her suffering. That was worse. On the fourth morning, royal drums suddenly echoed faintly in the far distance. Obesai heard them immediately. His soldiers were near. He closed his eyes briefly. The time had come. That afternoon, the village gathered in the central square for judgment. Amara stood alone before the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly. But she refused to cry publicly. Kofi smiled from beside his father. The villagers watched eagerly. Some fearful. Some excited. Chief Bako raised his staff slowly. The elders have reached a decision. Silence swallowed the village. Amara and her grandmother will be exiled before sunrise. Gasps spread instantly. Amara's face collapsed emotionally. Her grandmother lowered her head quietly. Kofi smirked proudly. Then suddenly, horns echoed from beyond the village gates. Deep. Powerful. Royal. The crowd froze. Moments later, armored horsemen stormed into the square carrying massive royal banners. Villagers dropped to their knees instantly. Fear spread everywhere. The royal guard. What are they doing here? Chief Bako's face turned pale. Then a commander stepped forward loudly. Kneel before His Majesty. Silence exploded across the village. Confusion spread everywhere. His Majesty? The villagers looked around desperately. Then slowly, Obesai stepped forward from the crowd and removed the worn traveler's cloak from his shoulders. Gold royal garments gleamed beneath the sunlight. The entire village stopped breathing. Kofi staggered backward. Chief Bako nearly collapsed. Amara stared at him in complete shock. No. Impossible. The traveler. The injured stranger. The poor man everyone mocked. Was the king. Villagers immediately threw themselves to the ground trembling. Forgive us, Your Majesty. We didn't know. Chief Bako crawled forward desperately. Your Majesty, please. Silence. Obesai's voice thundered across the square with terrifying authority. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The king slowly turned toward Amara. And suddenly, his expression softened completely. He walked toward her carefully while the entire village watched in stunned silence. Amara's eyes filled with tears. You? Obesai stopped directly in front of her. When I arrived hungry, you fed me. His voice became quieter now. When I arrived wounded, you healed me. Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks. When everyone mocked me for being poor, Obesai continued softly, you still treated me with dignity. The entire village stared speechless. Then something happened nobody expected. The king knelt before her. Gasps exploded everywhere. Kofi looked physically sick. Chief Bako trembled violently. Obesai looked up at Amara with emotion shining openly in his eyes. In a village filled with pride, he whispered, you alone showed compassion. Amara covered her mouth crying silently. You were kind when kindness cost you everything. The king slowly reached for her trembling hand. And that is why you are greater than anyone standing in this village. Villagers lowered their eyes in shame immediately. Even the wind felt silent. Then Obesai stood slowly before the crowd again. His face hardened instantly. Chief Bako. The chief crawled forward shaking. Yes, Your Majesty. You stole food taxes during drought. The chief froze. You abused your people through fear. Silence. You allowed cruelty to become entertainment. The villagers trembled harder. Obesai pointed toward Kofi. And your son used power to humiliate the innocent. Kofi fell to his knees immediately. Mercy, Your Majesty. But the king's voice remained cold. Mercy is difficult for cruel people to understand. Royal guards stepped forward instantly. Chief Bako and Kofi were dragged away screaming desperately. The villagers watched in terrified silence. Then Obesai turned toward the crowd once more. Remember this day carefully. Nobody moved. Never laugh at the poor again. His voice echoed powerfully across the square. Because dignity does not wear expensive clothing. Several villagers began crying quietly. Others looked too ashamed to raise their heads. Then slowly, Obesai turned back toward Amara. And for the first time since revealing himself, the king smiled again. Not the smile of a ruler, but the smile of a man deeply in love. Amara stared at him tearfully. You really are the king. Obesai nodded softly. Yes. Why would a king live like a poor traveler? He looked around the village quietly. My father once told me something before he died. The crowd listened silently. He said a king who only listens to wealthy people eventually becomes blind to suffering. Amara's tears continued falling. So you came searching? Obesai looked directly into her eyes. Yes. And what did you find? The king smiled gently. The woman I want beside me. The crowd gasped softly again. Amara blinked in shock. What? Obesai stepped closer. You taught me more about strength than anyone in my palace ever could. Emotion cracked his voice slightly. You remained kind while surrounded by cruelty. He took both her hands carefully. That kind of heart is rare. Amara shook her head emotionally. I'm nobody. No, Obesai whispered. You were simply surrounded by people too blind to recognize your worth. Tears flowed freely down her face now. The grandmother smiled proudly nearby. Then the king spoke the words that changed history forever. Amara, will you stand beside me as queen? The entire village froze again. Absolute silence. Amara stared at him speechless. You cannot mean that. I have never meant anything more. Her breathing became shaky. I'm poor. I know. I have nothing. Obesai smiled softly. You gave away everything even when you had little. That makes you richer than most rulers. Amara finally broke into tears completely. And suddenly, she laughed softly through the crying. The king looked confused briefly. What? You still speak like a traveler sometimes. For the first time in years, Obesai laughed freely. Real laughter. Warm laughter. And the village watched in disbelief as the king held the girl they once mocked like she was the most precious thing in the world. Months later, everything changed. Chief Bako was removed permanently. Kofi disappeared from the village in disgrace. Food was distributed fairly. The poor were protected. Children received education. And the tiny hut near the forest remained untouched by royal order. When people asked why, King Obesai always answered the same way. That hut reminded me what humanity looks like. Amara became beloved across the kingdom. Not because she married the king, but because she never allowed power to change her heart. She still visited poor families personally. Still carried water herself sometimes. Still treated servants with respect. And every year during the harvest festival, elders repeated the same story to young children beside the fire. The village laughed at the poor girl. Until they discovered she was loved by the king. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and comment your favorite moment below. And tell us honestly, if you met someone poor and broken, would you still treat them with kindness if nobody else did?